The Corridor of Quiet Faces. Written by Khaled Abu El-Ada. The mind does not always break with drama. Sometimes it breaks with manners. It breaks the way a person leaves a room when they don't want to be seen crying, quietly, carefully, closing the door behind them so no one hears the latch. That is how it happened to me. Not in a car crash, not in a hospital, not at a funeral. No grand tragedy that gave people permission to understand. It happened on an ordinary night. So ordinary it felt insulting later, like reality had chosen a boring moment on purpose. The hum of the fridge, the faint rumble of traffic far away, the soft blue glow of my phone screen dimming itself into sleep, as if even it was tired of looking at me. I remember thinking before I drifted off that I would wake up and try again. Try to be better, try to be lighter, try to feel less like I was carrying a stranger inside my chest. Then the clock said 3:14 a.m. and I woke up, not from a dream, not from sound, from presence. A pressure in the room, like the air had been pressed between two palms. A weight at the edge of my bed, as if someone unseen had lowered themselves onto the mattress without disturbing the sheets. My lungs tightened around a breath that refused to move. There are fears that sprint, and there are fears that sit down beside you and stare. This was the second kind. The darkness around me felt dense, not empty, not harmless, occupied, and then I heard it, a breath, not mine, slow, measured, imperfect, the sound of breathing performed by something that had studied humans the way a thief studies locks. Close enough to fool you at first, wrong enough to make your skin crawl once you noticed. I couldn't move. Fear roots you in a bone. It turns you into furniture. But the breathing continued. Too close, too deliberate, and something primal in me forced my hand toward the lamp. My fingers found the switch. Before I could flick it, the wall across from me pulsed. A single ripple, like a drop of water hitting the surface of a black lake. Then another. The paint shimmered, thinned, and began peeling itself apart in long, silent strands. A gap opened, straight, vertical, impossibly clean. Behind it, where a solid wall should have been, was a corridor. Narrow, colorless, endless, as if someone had extracted a passageway from a nightmare and stitched it into the architecture of my home. And lining the corridor walls were faces. Dozens of them, eyes closed, mouth relaxed in half whispers, features smoothed, unfinished, like sculptures waiting for a sculptor who had abandoned the mid-job. My breath became the loudest thing in the world. Then the corridor exhaled, and all the faces, every single one, opened their eyes. Not suddenly, not theatrically, slowly, like waking from a long, unwanted sleep. Their eyes followed me. Before I even moved, I swung my legs off the bed, trembling, unsure if I was choosing to approach or if something was pulling me forward. The air around the corridor was colder, almost metallic. A thin vibration ran across my skin, raising goosebumps in a steady, crawling wave. I took one step. The breathing stopped. All sound vanished, erased as if the world had been muted, and the nearest face whispered inside my skull. Not with a voice, but with a thought shaped like a word. Finally, my blood turned to ice. Another whisper overlapped it. "We've been waiting." I stepped into the corridor. The wall closed behind me with a soft, final sigh. The world outside disappeared like it had never existed. And I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that the faces weren't strangers. The seventh one on the right belonged to me. But not me now. Me at 15. Eyes frightened, jaw clenched, mouth open as if caught mid-confession. It whispered, "You shouldn't have left us here." The corridor lights flickered, one pulse like a heartbeat, and something deeper inside the passage shifted. A door waited at the far end. A door I knew I had to open. A door I felt I had opened before, even though I had never seen it in my life. Behind me, the faces whispered in unison, a chorus of versions of myself. "Go on. You can't turn back." My chest tightened. The corridor stretched, and I walked into the darkness that called me by every name I had ever abandoned. The long walk. The corridor lengthened with every step, stretching like a spine pulled too far. The faces along the walls watched without blinking, without breathing, without mercy. Their eyes carried a relentless observation that made the air feel surgical, as if this place was a clinic and I was the patient laid open. I kept walking because I had to, because something inside me knew. If I stopped, the corridor would swallow me. Not kill me, not hurt me. Worse, it would keep me. I would become another quiet face in the wall, frozen in a particular age, a particular regret, a particular moment I refused to process. Each footstep landed with a soft, dull sound, like stepping on a damp paper. The floor was solid, but it moved in subtle ways, adjusting to my weight, almost like a living thing learning my shape. The corridor wasn't built. It was aware. Halfway down, the whispers returned. Not as voices, as thoughts shaped like knives. You forgot us. You buried us. We waited. The words slid under my skin and went straight for the places I'd boarded up years ago. Memories I had locked away behind jokes, behind work, behind I'm fine, behind the quiet pride of someone who never asks for help. The face of me at 15 stared at me as I passed. The plaster around his cheek cracked. He whispered, "Don't open the door." I froze. The voice wasn't accusing. It was terrified. I turned toward him. The other faces stared, silent, tense, as if the corridor itself held its breath. "What?" I tried to say, but sound didn't exist here. My words came out as thought, thin and desperate. "Why not?" His eyes flicked to the far end where the flickering bulb hung over a black, unmarked door. "He's awake." A chill ran through me. I didn't know who he was, but I felt the truth of that pronoun like a hand tightening around my throat. Something waited behind that door, something familiar enough to recognize, something wrong enough to fear. I forced myself to move again, and as I walked, the corridor began to distort. The lights flickered irregularly, not like broken bulbs, but like lungs breathing. The faces strained against the walls, pressing forward, trying to free themselves. Hairline fractures spread across their foreheads and cheeks like veins. They weren't passive observers anymore. They were desperate. One face, older, maybe 40, weary and sunken, pushed its lips outward through the plaster. It whispered, "He remembers what you forgot." Another face added, "He kept what you threw away." A third, "He's been waiting longer than all of us." With each revelation, the corridor grew narrower, squeezing me forward like a throat constricting around a swallowed object. The air changed, damp, metallic like old blood drying on concrete. The bulb ahead flickered faster. The door beneath it pulsed once, twice, then went still. I reached it. Up close, the surface wasn't wood. It wasn't metal. It was something else. It felt warm. It shifted slightly beneath my fingertips, like skin reacting to touch. Behind me, the whispers rose into panic. "Don't open it. You don't want to see. You can't undo him. Turn back." I tried to glance behind me, but behind me was no corridor anymore. Only darkness. No direction. No return. The handle was an icy, bone-like shape that should not have been cold, but was. The moment my fingers wrapped around it, every whisper died. Silence. Absolute. Crushing. And through that silence, from the other side of the door, came a knock. Once. Soft. Polite. Almost gentle. The gentleness was the worst part, because it sounded like a person who had learned patience. Then a voice, muffled, but unmistakably mine, whispered through the door. "I knew you'd come." My stomach dropped as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. I opened the door. The room where I left myself. The door opened without a sound. Inside was a small room lit by a single bulb swaying gently, though there was no wind. The light was sickly, like it didn't want to be here either. In the center sat a man in a wooden chair. His wrists were bound, his head tilted slightly, as if he was listening to something only he could hear. He looked up. It was me. but not any version I remembered. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with a darkness that wasn't exhaustion. It was knowledge. He smiled faintly, thin, stretched too tight. You should have come sooner. I stood frozen at the threshold, feeling suddenly like a child who had wandered into a room in his own house he wasn't allowed to enter. The man tugged at the ropes. They loosened like they had been waiting for my arrival to release him. He stood. He was taller than me, not by height, by presence. His posture was straight, calm, controlled, a kind of confidence I had never owned. He walked around me slowly, studying me like a craftsman inspecting flawed material. "Do you know why I'm here?" he asked. I couldn't answer. My voice had abandoned me again. He continued anyway, like my silence was confirmation. "Every fear you buried, every memory you avoided, every version of you they trapped in that corridor." He paused behind me. His breath touched my ear. It smelled like cold rain and old paper. I kept him alive. A wave of sadness hit me, so hard my knees almost gave out, because in that sentence was the truth I had avoided for years. I didn't heal. I stored. I didn't process pain. I archived it. I collected the worst moments of my life and told myself I would deal with them later, when I had time, when I had strength, when I deserved it. Later never came. The man stepped in front of me again and smiled, patient as a confession. "You survived by splitting yourself into pieces," he said, "but I survived by staying whole." My chest tightened with something that wasn't fear. It was grief, because I recognized him, not as a monster, as the version of me I had exiled, the part that carried the unsaid things, the ugly feelings, the shame I couldn't look at, the anger I refused to admit belonged to me. He was not supernatural. He was not a demon. He was consequence. He tilted his head. "You think you're the real one," he said softly, almost kindly. "But you're only the one who kept walking away." The bulb above us swayed a little more, as if the room was breathing. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't obey. He leaned closer. "Now I'm taking your place." My blood turned cold again. I tried to fight, tried to do something, but the room didn't allow struggle. The corridor didn't allow heroism. This place wasn't built for victory. It was built for truth. The bulb snapped. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that darkness, I felt my hands grip my shoulders. Not violently, firmly, like someone positioning a mannequin. A whisper pressed against my ear, intimate as a secret. "Thank you for opening the door." When the light returned, only one of us was standing. And it wasn't the one who walked in. 3. The sad part people don't talk about. This is where a cleaner story would end. A twist, a shock, a final sentence that makes an audience inhale. But life doesn't always end where it should. Sometimes the worst part isn't the moment you lose. It's the moment you realize you gave away the parts of yourself that could have saved you. Because I didn't die in that room. I didn't disappear. I became something quieter. I became a face. The corridor returned, not as a hallway I walked through, but as the only landscape left. I was pressed into plaster, my cheek against cold, my body reduced to shape. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink, but I could see, and what I saw was the door closing as the other me walked out. He wore my posture, my calm, my practiced expression, my "I'm fine." He glanced back once, not with cruelty, not with triumph, with pity. Then he was gone, and the corridor filled with the softest sound in the world. Breathing, not mine, his. Steady, human enough. A perfect copy now, improved by experience. The faces around me stared forward. Some looked furious. Some looked broken. Some looked relieved, as if finally their waiting had a reason. The 15-year-old me was nearby, eyes wet with terror. His lips moved. A thought reached me like a bruise. This is what happens when you abandon yourself. The sadness of that sentence wasn't dramatic. It was old. It was the sadness of people who keep surviving without ever returning to themselves. I tried to scream, but there was no sound here. Only observation, only memory, only waiting. Time passed in strange chunks, like it wasn't measured in minutes, but in regret. And I began to understand the true horror of the corridor. wasn't punishment. It was storage. It was the place where the mind puts what it cannot bear. The mind doesn't destroy pain. It preserves it. And if you never return, the preserved parts begin to rot. Not into nothingness, but into something that eventually walks back into your life wearing your face. The corridor lights flickered like tired lungs. The other faces whispered occasionally, not to each other, but to themselves, silent prayers shaped like apologies. I watched the door at the far end, because doors do not stay closed forever. Not when something is hungry, not when something is patient, not when something has learned that people will eventually open it themselves, out of curiosity, out of desperation, out of loneliness. I waited, and in the waiting, memories arrived. Not gently, like floods. The first face I remembered. I was 8. My mother stood in the kitchen with her back to me. Her shoulders looked heavier than her body should have allowed. She wasn't crying loudly. She was crying in a disciplined way, quiet enough to pretend it wasn't happening. I asked what was wrong. She didn't answer. That was her gift and her curse. Silence. Silence as protection. Silence as prison. I learned early that feelings were inconveniences. That sadness should be swallowed. That questions should be folded away like laundry and placed neatly in drawers. At school, a teacher praised my drawing. I ran home with the paper held up like a trophy. My father glanced at it once. "Good," he said, then returned to his television, then returned to his silence. No hug, no warmth, not cruelty, just absence. That absence became my first corridor, the first quiet place I stored a piece of myself. The 8-year-old face on the wall looked at me now, eyes closed, as if still waiting for someone to praise him properly. The second face I remembered. I was 15, the same face that warned me. The night I told someone I loved them, and they laughed like it was a joke they didn't order. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was worse. It was casual, like my confession was a small inconvenience in their day. I remember going home and staring at the ceiling, telling myself I didn't care, telling myself I was above embarrassment. But humiliation is not a feeling you outrun. It is a feeling you store, and stored humiliation becomes resentment, and resentment becomes hunger, and hunger becomes the part of you that learns to take instead of ask. The 15-year-old face didn't just represent fear. He represented the moment I decided I would never risk being seen again. The third face I remembered. I was 22. My friend called me on a night I didn't answer. He was the loud kind of sad, laughing too hard, speaking too fast, pretending the world couldn't touch him. He said he needed me. I said I was tired. I said I'd call back. I didn't. The next day he was gone. Not dead. Worse. He had moved away without telling anyone. Left the city like it had burned him. Like he was escaping a version of himself he couldn't tolerate. Years later, I heard he did end up dead. An overdose. A quiet apartment. A body found late. The type of death that doesn't even get an audience. I told myself it wasn't my fault. And maybe it wasn't. But guilt doesn't only grow from responsibility. It grows from absence. From the calls you ignored. From the hands you didn't hold. From the moments you chose comfort over courage. That guilt became another face. 4. The corridor's true hunger. Over time, I realized the corridor wasn't just a place. It was a mechanism, a system. It kept every discarded version of me like an archive. And archives do not forgive. They preserve. They keep proof. They keep records of every time you abandoned yourself to survive. The corridor wanted one thing. A new keeper. A new whole version built from everything I avoided. That is what the man in the chair was. He was the sum of my neglected parts, stitched together into something stable, something cold, something capable. While I, who had spent years pretending pain didn't exist, had become thin. Hollow, easy to replace. That is the saddest truth. You can live for years avoiding your own darkness. And one day your darkness learns to live without you. One day it becomes confident. One day it becomes the one who speaks in meetings, laughs at jokes, shakes hands, answers texts. One day, it becomes the version of you that functions, while the real you is locked behind a door, pressed in a plaster, eyes open in a corridor no one will ever see. I waited there, unable to move, unable to scream, watching the light flicker like a dying star. And the longer I waited, the more I understood. The corridor did not hate me. It simply did what I taught it to do. Store, hide, preserve. It was the natural architecture of avoidance. The final knock. Time passed strangely. Then one day, the door at the end opened again. Not fully, just a crack. And a new person stepped inside. Not me, someone else. A stranger's posture, a stranger's fear, a stranger's trembling curiosity. They looked around the corridor, eyes wide, breath shaking. And the corridor, like it had done to me, exhaled. Faces opened their eyes slowly, watching, waiting. The stranger's gaze moved along the walls until it landed on mine. And something in them changed. Recognition, not of me, of themselves. Because that is the corridor's trick. It shows you what you've abandoned. And everyone has abandoned something. The stranger stepped closer. Their hand rose toward my face as if touching plaster could return what was lost. I tried to speak. I tried to warn them. But in this place, warnings become whispers inside someone's skull. And the corridor whispered through me. Finally, the stranger flinched. Tears filled their eyes. They whispered out loud because they still had the privilege of sound. Who are you? I wanted to say, I'm what you become when you keep walking away from yourself. Instead, the corridor spoke for me, using my silence like an instrument. We've been waiting. The stranger looked toward the far door where the bulb flickered. They shook their head. No, they whispered. No, I won't. But fear makes promises it can't keep. Curiosity is a quiet hunger. Loneliness is a key. The stranger began walking, and I understood with a grief so deep it felt ancient that the corridor was not unique to me. It wasn't my curse. It was human. It was the place everyone builds inside themselves. Some people never find the door. Some people do. And the saddest people are the ones who do, because they have already been living on the edge of breaking for a long time. The stranger reached the door, placed their hand on the handle. The handle was cold, bone-like, familiar. They hesitated, and from the other side came a gentle knock. Once, polite, patient, then the voice, muffled, intimate, whispered, I knew you'd come. The stranger opened the door, and the corridor watched. And I watched, because I had become the kind of witness you become when you can no longer save anyone. A face, a record, a regret preserved in plaster. The end.